that we have from the Oracy All-Party Parliamentary Group. And today's online session is going to be focusing on the international approaches to classroom talk. Now, this will have a particular focus on looking at Oracy abroad and how that's developed, on the evidence, the international evidence that demonstrates the value and the impact of developing children and young people's spoken language skills, the status as well of Oracy in other countries' educational systems, and how they have overcome barriers to the embedding of Oracy in teaching and learning. And then some recommendations for reform in our English education system. Specifically, what should we be teaching and assessing and why? And we really do have an absolutely stellar lineup. And I am genuinely thrilled to pieces to have the people that we have on the call with us right now. So first, I mean, not that any of these people need introducing, but I will introduce them anyway. The first we have Andreas Schleicher, who's a Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, he initiated and oversees the program for international student assessment, which is most people know as PISA, and other international instruments that have created a global platform for policymakers, researchers, and educators across nations and cultures to innovate and transform educational policies and practices. He's worked for over 20 years with ministers and education leaders around the world to improve quality and equity in education. The former US Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, said that Schleicher, quote, understands the global issues and challenges as well as or better than anyone I've met, and he tells me the truth. And I have to say, speaking personally as someone who sat on the Education Select Committee listening to the evidence that Andreas Schleicher gave, I think that was echoed by all politicians from all political parties at the end of that session as well. And we also have with us Professor Lauren Resnick, who's a Professor of Psychology and Cognitive Science and the Director of the Institute of Learning from the University of Pittsburgh. She's an education psychologist and internationally known scholar who has made exceptional contributions to the cognitive science of learning and instruction. She served as the director of the prestigious Learning Research and Development Center and is the founder and director of the Institute of Learning, both at the University of Pittsburgh, where she is a distinguished university professor of psychology and cognitive science and of learning science and education policy. She's the founder of the theory and the practice of accountable talk, which is an approach which develops students' ability to think and learn through talk, something that matters so much to us here on the Oracy APPG. And the goal of accountable talk is to develop students' ability to think. By practicing the skills and habits of argumentation through social interaction, students learn to reason. So I'm really pleased that she's here with us as well. And Dr. Sandra Berkowitz, who's from the World Schools and Public Forum debate coach, US debate team coach, and former professor of communication studies, University of Maine. Dr. Sandra Berkowitz is a World School and Public Forum debate coach, where she also serves as a director of the Senior Speech Program and teaches the Senior Communication Capstone course. She is the coach of the US debate team, working primarily with the development team. She's been a professor of communication studies at the University of Maine, Wayne State University, and community colleges, where her research interests include the connections between debate and critical thinking, gender and social practices, and critical cultural discourse. So I'm going to be listening especially carefully. So the next time I'm going into the Parliament to have a debate, I'm going to pick up on some skills that I'm from today. She's earned multiple awards for teaching and coaching and has published a number of book chapters and articles. And I'm really pleased that she's here today. As I said at the beginning, this is a stellar lineup. This is the VIPs of Oracy. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to hand over to Andreas Schleicher, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Sorry, you'll just have to mute yourself.
Yes, I think now it should work. Thanks so much. And I want to start by saying that actually our international comparative evidence in this field at the OECD is still very limited. I would say that Oracy is an element that has only come recently into curriculum design. Countries generally prioritize more active learning, student agency, and the ways to express students to express themselves. That has gained prominence in curriculum design. We capture that very clearly in our Education 2030 curriculum framework. But when it comes to outcomes, our evidence is still very limited. Clearly, I think if you want young people to be able to think for themselves and work with others, then Oracy is always at the heart of this. The area where we have the best evidence concerns the early years. We recently conducted the world's first international comparative assessment of learning outcomes among 5-year-olds, and we gave Oracy a quite important role in this assessment, because the expression of young children is shown to be highly predictive for success later on. So basically what we did is we watched, children were watching and listening to animated stories on a tablet computer, and then they were responding to questions from educators and analysts relating to questions relating to the story. So we looked at their expression, we looked at vocabulary, we looked at phonological awareness, and many dimensions that are the foundations for Oracy. If I look to the results for England, we found that 5-year-olds, that was our target group in England, have quite similar levels of oral language skills to children in Estonia, which is a great benchmark. It's one of the best performing education systems, and we're significantly more advanced than 5-year-old children in the United States. So you can see a very significant difference in those oral dimensions from children in the United States, according to this assessment. When it comes to parents had a much more positive view of their children's language development than the children's teachers. That's actually really interesting. Independent from the objective assessment that we did, the assessment, we asked, parents and teachers, and we had 70% of children who were rated by their parents as being above average in their ability to use language and communicate effectively. It's almost an impossibility. You can't have 70%, but parents were very positive about their children, whereas teachers were more negative than the data showed. Only 35% of children were rated by their teachers as doing well or being above average. We found that girls have generally stronger oral skills than boys, 5-year-olds, and that was shown both in the direct assessment, so in the test, and also when we asked parents and teachers. So the perception was aligned with those test results. The gender gap in England was visible, but similar to that what we saw in Estonia in the United States. So that's a pretty universal pattern that we observed. We also looked at social background. Differences in our language were found based on the social background of children's families, actually quite significant, quite large differences. 5-year-olds in the top quarter on the socioeconomic distribution had much higher scores. That was about, equivalent of about 1 year of literacy developed than children in the bottom quartile. So you can really see how social background at the age of 5 in Oracy is already highly visible. And from then on, those kinds of disparities tend, unfortunately, to grow, not to become smaller. The learning gap relating to a social background was much larger in England than it was in Estonia, but it was quite similar between England and the United States. And there you can see something in Estonia seems to be able to contain those kinds of social differences that isn't operating well in England. We looked only at 5-year-olds. We didn't look below that, so it's very hard to detect what those kinds of factors were. But because early childhood education participation rates in England and Estonia are actually quite similar, so we haven't been able to identify those factors, but there seems to be something in Estonia that avoids the emergence of those social disparities. And as you might know from our PISA study later on, also there, we see much fewer kind of social disparities than we do see in England. Immigrant status also played a role. Children from migrant backgrounds, that was about almost 20% of the children in the sample, I think precisely 18%. And interestingly, once you do account for social background and also the home language of children, we could not find any disadvantage in Oracy among children with an immigrant background. Again, conditional on social background, conditional on home language. When you take those factors in account, actually children from an immigrant background did as well as children without an immigrant background in England. And that's different from what we see in the United States. Now, we also collected some interesting data on the activities that parents undertake with their children. As you can imagine, for 5-year-olds, the role of parents is actually very significant in this. And what we see is that in England, children whose parents read to them 5 to 7 days a week, so basically on almost daily basis, and also who had frequent back and forth conversations with them, you could see that that was mirrored in much stronger emergent literacy and oracy in the children. So you can really see how parental engagement on literacy, and this was, both reading and speaking, really had a big kind of effect on children's way to articulate and express themselves. We also saw, and that's something that will not surprise you, that parents from advantaged social groups do those things much more often than parents from disadvantaged groups. And there you can see there could be, it's an hypothesis, there could be one of the drivers influencing the large disparities among social groups that we finally looked at. We also looked at the digital devices, and what was quite interesting, you have in England about 40% of 5-year-olds already using a desktop or laptop computer, tablet device, or smartphone on a daily basis. Very, very high kind of incidence and intensity of technology use. And then, further 46% use the device at least once a week, and then 9% do it at least once a month. So very high kind of technology use, but we couldn't find any difference in the emergent literacy scores of children who hardly or never use those devices from those who use them on a very kind of frequent basis, even after accounting for social background. So even though those children may have, interacted with language elements much more closely through technology, that didn't seem to, give them any advantage on this. Now, that was about 5-year-olds. That's the newest study that we have done, and where we actually did assess oracy, sort of oral expression of children separately. Few words from PISA, where we look more at the reading capacities of students. But I want to just highlight 2 findings here. We showed in the 2018 assessment for the UK that about only 39% of students said that their teachers encouraged them to express their opinion in most classes. So that's something that sort of the oracy kind of encouragement from teachers seemed to be only affecting a minority of students. And then, but you had 37% also of students who said that teachers poses questions to them that motivate them to participate actively in the classroom in most classes. And that is actually slightly higher than the OECD average of 35%. But you could see from this is that learning in British classrooms is still a kind of passive phenomenon where actually this active contribution doesn't seem to be consistently encouraged. On the positive side, we found that debating clubs are quite a common extracurricular activity offered by schools in the UK, more so than in other OECD countries. Basically, 40% of students reported that their school had offered some form of debating club or debating activities, and I think that's a quite good number. So that's really, I think, what I can say in this brevity. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you so much. There's a few things that immediately just stood out to me. I mean, I'm now very keen to go and find out what's happening in Estonia and why that's making such a big difference. And the comment you made about active contribution not being encouraged in British classrooms. And I think the point about there being no difference for children who use devices, because there's this almost populist feeling that the use of devices is limiting children's oracy. So it's really interesting that with you saying that there wasn't any difference. But I wonder if I can start the most difficult question first. What do you think, what's your call to action for policymakers in the United Kingdom? What are your recommendations for reform in the English education system, specifically in relation to the development of effective communication skills? What should they be doing?
I would look at 2 aspects. One is I do hope that, evaluation and assessment will build some of those elements into the future. And I do think digital technology and now allows us to do that. In fact, in PISA, we're working on those kinds of methods. You know, as long as exams and assessments do not reflect Oracy skills, it's no surprise that teachers do not put that much of an importance to this. So I would, you know, work on that to make sure that if this is an important curriculum objective, and it is in England, then, you know, it should be mirrored in the way in which learning outcomes are being examined, and that I think will have a backwash effect on the learning activities. When it comes to curriculum, I do think in the times in which we live and in which we will live, you know, the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test are also disappearing from our labor market. You know, the reproduction of subject content is diminishing in value. You know, computers are doing that really well. I think the capacity of young people to think for themselves, to manage and resolve conflicts, tensions and dilemmas, to create, you know, be imaginative, creative, and all of those actually closely relate to agency, to the capacity of young people to express themselves. I do think in our future curricular and instructional system, I think they deserve a much stronger role. No? And otherwise, you know, there is a risk that our schools are educating second-class robots, not first-class humans. Now, I think that's really, I think, where we are sort of seeing I think, you know, the advent of artificial intelligence, you know, that does much of the coding, pushes us to think much harder what makes us human. And I think Oracy is clearly one of those elements now. And I think Oracy and all other forms of expression, I would say the same thing about, you know, musical expression, or what I think I would put them in the same category.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting, that comment, second class robots, not first class humans. And I think that's such a powerful statement. So next question, which country is doing this well? Do you know of any countries who are performing well in Oracy, who are actually getting this right?
Well, as I said, we have only, you know, that's the first assessment that we have done comparatively is about 5-year-olds, and in a very limited range. And on the PISA, we don't yet have Oracy data. The data from Estonia, I think, are quite striking. I think they have the fact that they are capable to mediate social background to that extent, give children, you know, a strong start, and see that later on playing out, I think is a very good kind of example. But unfortunately, in PISA, we will introduce that in 2024. So, but it's going to be quite some time in the future when we have real kind of comprehensive data around the world for that.
Just to return thinking about the UK system, which I know you know well, what do you think the limitations are of the exam system that we have currently in the UK? And what could be an effective alternative?
Well, you know, the exam system, it's limited in the subject areas. It's very much focused on, you know, mathematics, on language, passive language use, and on science. And I do think there is room to actually introduce more active components, more active problem-solving components. That's, I think, one element of this, and then more active expression in this. I think there is a risk in England to sacrifice validity gains for efficiency gains, and to sacrifice relevance for reliability. You know, I think the people are very kind of concerned that, you know, human judgment in exams may introduce some, you know, nuance and some uncertainty, but at the same time, doing everything in a way that is computer scored or, you know, multiple choice also takes away a lot of validity and relevance in the assessments. I think that's always a trade-off that you have to strike, but I would say looking to the future, I think it's important to give sufficient emphasis to, and, you know, some of those exam questions may be harder to read. In fact, you know, it was so interesting for me, like this year when they introduced, you know, when the exam could take place and they introduced predictive scores. Actually, an element of this is very healthy, you know, to look at, you know, the broader trajectory of students, you know, what they have learned in a school year. I think it can be done a lot better than on an ad hoc basis, but I think the idea to use the exams to account for a broader range of student experiences, I think is a good step.
So just on that, because obviously we moved in England, not Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, we moved to an exam-only system only a few years ago. What do you see the disadvantages or advantages of where we've moved, and would you recommend that we change this?
Well, you know, in an exam-only system, you limit basically the view on students on what they can deliver in a very compressed period of time. Actually, you talk about hours. And you limit the view to a relatively narrow range of subjects and questions. And I think that's the big price that you pay. What you gain is objectivity and reliability. I think those are the kind of trade-offs now, I think.
I'm getting a few questions coming in, but I'm going to be cheeky and use the chair to just ask another one of my own. Is there any country out there who does use Oracy to assess? Is there a country who currently uses Oracy to assess instead of the formal way of doing exams?
I would need to look that up. You know, we will have that document in our 2030 project, but I do not know the answer now.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to read a couple of questions I've just got coming in from the audience. So someone's asking if the Estonian curriculum has a more explicit Oracy focus.
Yeah, actually, the Estonian curriculum is all around human expression and student agency. That's very much at the heart of what teachers do and what teaching in Estonia is about. And that's true for I think for all of the Nordic countries. I think that's a strong emphasis in learning. Students are encouraged to express themselves in every form.
And you know, obviously, things haven't gone exactly according to plan here in the United Kingdom with assessing sort of grades at the end of this year. I'm sure you've seen it all. But are there any examples of countries who are coping well with the COVID classroom setup? Because one of the conversations I was having with Robin Alexander is the concern that the having to sit in rows all facing forward because of the transmission of the virus could inhibit classroom talk. So are there any countries who are coping with this well? Have they got alternative ways of setting up? Are you worried that worries about the transmission of COVID could impact on classroom talk?
Well, first off, you know, I think we should be satisfied that schools are back on track in most countries. I think that's a big achievement in OECD countries. With a few exceptions, I think schools are back in operation. But this being said, yes, we are quite concerned. I think the social distancing requirements are limiting the kind of pedagogical experience very significantly. You know, I think that the number one subject that you avoid is singing, no? But Oracy comes pretty close after. I think anything that these are the subjects where the risks are clearly higher. And as we know now, I think, and also, you know, interactive pedagogies, project-based learning, all of those kinds of important aspects of learning are suffering in this crisis. Maybe, you know, technology will help us to overcome some of those barriers. And some countries, actually, you ask about interesting examples. Singapore actually understood first what were the kind of limiting factors, and they worked very hard to introduce the arts and to reintroduce them in a kind of safe set of spaces. And so far, actually, infection rates in schools have been very low. So I think we are probably everywhere on the cautious side, and the risk is that we then, you know, lose important areas and aspects of learning. But I do think that is a very relevant concern, that the social distancing requirements are actually limiting many forms of learning very seriously.
Thank you so much, and I'm conscious of time, and I can only say thank you for giving your time up to come and talk to us today. It's been such a privilege, and as always, you've given so much food for thought, and I'm going to rewatch this at the end and look again at all the comments that you made. But thank you again for coming. Is there, before you have to go, I realise, but is there anything you just want to add before you have to go?
No, I think I just want to say, I think it's great that you put this on the agenda. I don't think it's so prominently on the policy agenda in education, of school education at the moment in England. So I think it's good that you look into this aspect. And clearly, when you speak with employers, you know, they will be very sympathetic. You know, they often miss those kinds of elements. Even higher education, you'll find many kind of higher education institutions emphasizing the lack of Oracy skills. I think on the demand side, there's a very clear picture. But on the supply side, I do not see, I mean, I'm not, you know, you'll be a much better judge of what's happening in England, but to my perception, this is not extremely high on the current kind of policy agenda and should probably deserve its attention. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm delighted to be moving on now to listen to our next witness, Professor Lauren Resnick, and then hear her thoughts. And of course, you're always welcome to respond to what Andreas Schleicher has just said. Welcome. There you are, Lauren. On my Zoom screen, things keep moving around. You've just moved. There you are. Welcome. And you just...
Okay.
Are we on?
Yeah, you're on.
You can hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, so I'm going to speak from a particular point of view about using language to use my script so I don't waste time. So there's a great deal of evidence based on work over the last 40 years or so on the potential power of teacher-guided classroom discussion. We call it dialogical teaching or accountable talk or academically productive talk, and there are many other terms. This work relates to Oracy as it's understood in the UK, but it's not identical, and I want to just tell you about the differences, and then you can decide how much they matter. Our focus in the US is not on teaching children to speak better or more proper English. In other words, Oracy as such is not a goal. Rather, our focus is to use children's existing language skills and the growing skills that they have to improve their knowledge in reasoning and math, science, literacy, and eventually virtually any domain of knowledge. So with that as a goal, we now have evidence from both the UK and the US and from several other countries that, as I like to put it, accountable talk can build the mind. It'll make you get smarter. We do need to continue enough evidence now that I think we can profitably turn to the task of applying what we know to improve teaching and learning at scale. So what is this evidence? First of all, it's a long and robust tradition of research on classroom discourse in both the UK and the US. I'm not as well. The evidence shows that well-structured and guided classroom discussion improves students' capacity to build knowledge together. They build this knowledge across differences of cultures and school disciplines, and participation in this kind of talk can, in the terms I like, build the mind, that is, make students smarter. It will be shown by increased test scores and other measures of learning, but the goal is making people smarter, able to use their natural endowments. Well-guided talk, so it's not, well-guided talk enables students to go public with their own ideas, listen attentively to other ideas, dig deeper into their own reasoning, models, and evidence, and think with, build on, and critique others' arguments. When teachers engage their children in this way, their students, they create classroom cultures that have very specific characteristics. To use Robin Alexander's terms, there are 6 of these characteristics. The classrooms are collective. The classroom is a site of joint learning and inquiry. They are reciprocal. Participants listen to each other, share ideas, and consider alternative viewpoints. They're supportive. Participants feel able to express ideas freely without risk of embarrassment over wrong answers or what I might call first draft talk. And they help each other to reach common understandings. They're not competitive. They are deliberative. Participants discuss and seek to resolve different points of view. They present and evaluate arguments, and they work toward reasoned positions and outcomes. They're cumulative. Participants build on their own and each other's contributions and then chain them into coherent lines of thinking and understanding. They are purposeful. Classroom talk through open language and dialogue is structured with specific learning goals in mind. So this is not an anything goes kind of talk, or the idle chatter that some of us sometimes worry might overrun our schools. This kind of well-guided talk has been shown to actually build the mind, makes people smarter. And I think we've heard that also from Andreas, something very similar. It works with all kinds of students and populations when it's used appropriately. But we've also learned that it is very challenging. I don't know how to understate how challenging, I don't know how to overstate, sorry, how challenging it is for teachers to learn how to do it well. Dialogic teaching is difficult because it goes against the grain of practices that are deep in the DNA of teachers virtually all over the globe. Recitation is the default pattern of classroom talk. By recitation, I mean initiation, I, response, R, and evaluation. Initiation is by the teacher, response is by a student usually, and evaluation is again back to the teacher. A single teacher ends up speaking twice as much as the assembled students do. So we turn classrooms into listening boxes, but we don't build the mind very much. It seems evident upon reflection that this kind of practice is unlikely to support deep learning. So we have a solid evidence base and an international consensus on the possibilities and the challenges of dialogic teaching. Now it's time to go from just collecting evidence to action, to focus on improving learning by changing classroom practices. What we have to do is, what we have to figure out are the kinds of manageable and scalable interventions that help teachers to take up these new principles and practices that they themselves may never have experienced in their own schooling. The good news is that we already have outstanding and well-researched models for teaching teachers for professional development. That's true in the UK, in the US, and in many other places. We're not using them much. Robin Alexander's recent intervention to promote dialogic learning as part of a randomized control is exemplary. And there are many other research-based models in the US and elsewhere that show great promise of increased performance in science, math, English, and literacy. There are a number of studies that confirm the power of dialogic teaching to improve overall learning. Sarah Michaels, who worked with me and Kathy O'Connor, colleagues from Boston, who worked with me to draft this testimony, have developed intensive and supportive programs for teachers who are just learning to conduct dialogic teaching efforts. These UK and US projects, and they exist elsewhere in the world as well, have several common features in the ways that they support teacher learning. They use carefully designed video cases of teachers. They use discussion protocols with teachers who are looking at these video cases. They use various forms of what we might call during enactment and post-enactment coaching, both in-person and virtual. They introduce a variety of talk tools and support practice with them. So there's the beginning of a revolution available if we choose to use it. But these are not simple undertakings. They take time. They require skilled dialogic facilitators to build more skilled dialogic facilitators. These facilitators can model for teachers what productive talk looks like and feels like as teachers participate in the professional learning itself. So it's a highly embedded system in which we want people to teach the way they are learning to teach. Sounds impossible, but we know it isn't when it's really done. All of these interventions take teachers seriously as knowledge builders, not as technicians. They recognize that teachers must be supported to become critical consumers of curriculum and agents in bringing good curriculum to life. So there's a revolution now. We'll get there in a minute. So what do we need going forward? What we need is to make these dialogic teaching strategies available to educators and students broadly across schools, districts, and entire countries, regardless of students' class, culture, or initial English language proficiency, or whatever their native language. We need to figure out how to develop and support a new generation of teacher educators. This is going to be a cascading system. There are various models available in the US and the UK and elsewhere, but they exist in separate pockets of good educational practice. What we don't yet have is a mechanism for joining up these pockets, for taking educationally productive talk to scale across entire education systems. That's the task now at hand. We should seek to bring together those who have devised the most effective of these models to establish common principles that can be translated into programs suitable for all of the students who seek to learn and the teachers who seek to teach them. That's it. I don't know if I'm under or over time, but
no, that's really good. I mean, some of the things I loved that idea of accountable talk and building the mind, and I think I should have said I used to be a primary teacher myself, and I think it's really important that we do identify the difficulty that teachers will have and the training needs that there will be and the need for specialist support, and recognize that that's expensive and time away from the classroom and able to make it happen are all difficult challenges. And because I think sometimes we forget the practical challenges that exist out there in the schools. But one of the things when people object to what we're talking about, accountable talk or oracy, is that they say, well, the students don't know enough to have a meaningful discussion. They've got to have the knowledge first. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'd be more polite than I will be here. I would say that's simply not true. Part of the skills of educators that have to be developed is how to build a sort of gradual climbing the mountain of knowledge. All children know something, all except perhaps the most real. There are a few people who really aren't competent, but virtually all children know something. Our job is to work with the something that they do know, and they're growing skills in communicating with each other to build more and more and more. The program that I'm proposing is a long-term one. Long-term might be 10 to 15 years, in which each year the teachers who were coached into good performance take on some other teachers that they will coach, and next year some more. Well, in 10 years you can have a very vast array of people who know how to lead children in this development, but you have to set up to do it, not worry that we don't know exactly what to do. It's true that we don't. But more and more of what we have been doing, we've proven does not produce this growing knowledge and capacity.
Do you think there's been a sort of a decline in accountable talk, or do you feel more optimistic that in the US it is being embedded in the schools?
I don't know. I don't think there's been a decline, but I'm not aware of a great deal of growth either. With all due respect to the international exams that we just heard, which have a major function, I think they've been holding us back also. The exams themselves don't hold people back. It's the use of the exams. If you use them to mark how things are going, but not to practice, that would be fine. But what goes on is test preparation in the US, maybe not in other countries. A vast amount of school time is devoted to getting children to practice on the exams, last year's version. The tests have taken over, and while they're very powerful as psychometric evidence, they do not represent the full nature of language competence or oracy. I'm not used to using the word oracy, so I'm not sure whether I want to use it because I might misuse it. We don't use that term at all in America that I'm aware of. But we're on the cusp of something. The assembled evidence of how students, children and older students from all kinds of social backgrounds can increase their academic performance, even if they don't speak it beautifully, even if they have an accent that we don't like. Their thinking is developing. And that's what education is central for, not speaking right. That's the American view. We're able to accept many ways of saying it.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that. I think definitely when we're talking about oracy, we're not talking about everyone having the same accent, and you can set, well, you can tell from mine or not mine, certainly.
I know that you people who are developing this program now and taking the evidence, you understand this. I'm trying to perhaps provide a little something you can use to educate others who had less time to hear about it, about what the actual role of language is. Babies are born with the ability to quickly learn language. Think about what the difference between a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old is. Extraordinary. And now think about a 2-year-old versus a 6-year-old. Well, a 6-year-old sounds almost ready to go to university in comparison to the 2-year-old. The ability of humans to grow and grow and grow their knowledge and reasoning capacity. I know we're going to hear shortly about reasoning and argumentation. This is very similar, actually. But we, or I, and many colleagues here in America are less interested in building the argumentative capacity than in using the existing argumentative capacity to grow virtually everything else. And the argumentative capacity means not shouting at each other, but reasoning with each other, talking with each other. It is stunning when you watch it in classrooms.
And I think the world needs that right now, doesn't it? But I'm going to move on to Sandra Berkowitz, who's going to talk to us next. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. What I want to do is to share my screen, because in good teacher approach, I have slides. Okay, so let me hit that. All right. So thank you all very much for inviting me. I come at this a little bit different, from a different perspective slightly, and that is that from a communication perspective, I was a college communication professor for a lot of years. And now I am back teaching in a high school classroom and coaching debate at the high school and middle school level on a consistent basis. So I sort of bridge the gap between sort of theory and practice. So what I want to do is to start by kind of talking about kind of where I'm from and what my experience is right now. So I teach at a school called the Blake School, which is an independent school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have an extracurricular debate team, which means that we compete against schools from all over the United States, and now with the advent of being on Zoom all over the world. Here at Blake, we have both beginning and advanced debate classes that are taught at the school. My husband is actually the debate coach, and he teaches those classes. I teach something called Senior Seminar, which is a communication class. It's a capstone class for seniors who are not debaters. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but it is a communication class that the school believes is important across the curriculum. And I also am the director of the Senior Speech Assembly Program. Every senior gives a speech to the entire upper school, to the entire high school during the year. And so that provides a slightly different take on this whole notion of well-guided talk, because they take their agency and they do that. I am also, as was said in the introduction, a member of the coaching staff of USA Debate. So the USA national team, there's both a national team and a development team. We have primary responsibility for the development team, which is a training pathway to the national team, as well as ambassadors for World Schools Debate, which is similar to a parliamentary style of debate, which is popular in the UK. And so students are grades 9 through 11, and they they didn't make the national team in a sense, but they are strong debaters and they become ambassadors and learning more of world schools. So, well, there we go. One of the questions is sort of the culture of debate and the difference in the United States. In the United States, we have a long storied history of debate and different types of debate. So policy, Lincoln Douglas, public forum, and congressional debate have a long storied history, with policy going back to the 1930s. And congressional debate about that long, whereas public forum debate, which is designed for more community members to judge, is something that came about in 2002. World Schools Debate, which is what the national team does so that they can compete against teams from the UK and elsewhere, is one of the newer forms of debate in the United States. And so the culture is a little bit different. Not as many schools do that, but there is a culture of debate. There are a lot of different debate programs around the US. So what I want to do is to focus on outcomes or questions that we could take a look at. So the first question is one of what communication skills are developed through debate. And there is research, and the last number of slides have full citations for all the research if you are interested in taking a look at that. One of the key issues is critical thinking, that debate fosters critical thinking, and that research was done at the high school level, but I'm sorry, at the college level, but also takes into account what happens at the high school level as well. That was a study that I was a part of and work that I have been a part of. So critical thinking, there are measurable outcomes for critical thinking. And has been said before today, there is a development of student agency because students take responsibility for engaging in the debate. It is not like there are coaches off to the side who are talking you through this. It is you and your partner, if it's a partnered event, debating against another team, and then there's a judge in the back of the room, and so you are responsible for that. And so I think that there is clear development of agency and empathy, because one of the things that we talk about is that we may be talking about whether or not we should have Medicare for all, perhaps similar a bit to the UK health system, national health system, or whether or not there should be changes enacted to the criminal justice system, or whether or not there should be compulsory voting. And when we are doing those debates, we are talking about real life people who have real life experiences. So it is a way to grow students' empathy in how they understand people in different circumstances and how we talk about them. And even if you look at debaters' perceptions, there is a study from 2001 by Littlefield who looked at students' own perceptions, debaters' own perceptions about what they benefited from. And those things included speaking skills, because it gives you an opportunity to test those, topic knowledge, and education. We talk about that the amount of work that is done on a topic is similar to a college class, or similar if you are doing a debate like policy where you debate an entire topic for a year, that it's almost akin to doing work on a master's thesis, that you delve into the research that much, that you develop friends and interpersonal skills. And you have to develop those interpersonal skills because you have to be able to talk with a variety of people in a variety of circumstances. Research skills, obviously, because you are delving into those topics, and self-confidence. And I think that that is particularly true now that COVID has happened, and a lot of debate tournaments around the United States as well as around the world have moved online. And so you have to be able to demonstrate that self-confidence, not only face-to-face, but through a camera, when you only get to see this part of the person. All of that energy, all of those skills need to come through. And of course, there is civic engagement, that because you're looking at real life topics, that people become more civically engaged with issues within their communities. If I flip this around and look at what debate skills can be developed through CAC is communication across the curriculum classes. So the senior seminar class is more, and there are other classes that are taught in different curricular designs that talk about and use debate skills. You can have civic education through debate, as Zorwick and Wade argue in 2016. The diagram that you see on the slide in front of you is a representation of the issues that are covered in the senior seminar class that I teach. Well, what we're supposed to cover. We'll see how much we get to, given that we are currently hybrid and we're not sure if we're going to go virtual at some point. But the idea is that in talking about the campaign, the political campaign and the presidential campaign, that the debate skills of looking at evidence, of looking at issues, of looking at how people talk about these things are really important, and that you can develop that in a variety of communication across the curriculum classes. What are the debate impacts on education and other outcomes? There have been a number of studies that have been done within urban areas. That is the Urban Debate League, which is a group that sponsors and develops debate within urban communities. So New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Baltimore, Boston, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example. And there have been a number of studies that have argued for improvements in math and reading scores, decrease in absenteeism, improved likelihood of attending a selective high school if you are looking at middle school students, as well as increases in college readiness and career readiness. So there are a variety of studies that indicate that. There are a number of challenges and opportunities ahead, and I commend the committee here for focusing on K-12 and communication, oracy types of skills for very much the same reasons that we've already heard. I think that there are some challenges because you need a commitment at a variety of levels and resources. So you need it at the level of the school, you need it at the level of professional development so that you can have teacher training, as Lauren talked about, and so that you have teacher agency, as well as if you have debate programs where you have non-teacher coaches, that there is support for them to be able to do that. And I think that there are opportunities in terms of international outreach and cooperation, in terms of developing connections with organizations and coaches. And I think the online opportunities to develop debate tournaments as well as curricular opportunities really open up things. So while we are limited by COVID right now, I think that this has opened up a number of opportunities. I will end there and see if there are any questions. There are slides that talk about that.
Thank you so much for that. It was really very, very interesting. And I'm a bit worried that the questions that I did have written down for you, I might have to forfeit, because I know that there's a couple of other people who I just need to squeeze in the minutes we have left. But I'd love to keep in touch with you if that's possible.
Absolutely.
Can I just really quickly bring in someone from the Oracy network? And now I'm going to just quickly get my phone out. And Arlene Holmes Henderson, who's from the Speaking Citizen Project, who's been conducting comparative Oracy research in Australia, New Zealand, and the US. If you're able to just add a quick thought, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to share an example from the Australian state of Victoria, where Oracy does enjoy high status and has been embedded on the curriculum and the qualifications framework for quite some time. So an example from the Victorian Certificate of Education is all students doing English in the Victoria Certificate of Education have to give a 4 to 6 minute oral presentation, which presents a point of view on material which has appeared in the media since the 1st of September the previous year, and that is assessed by their teachers. And in order to do that, it is written into the curriculum that they must study the conventions of oral presentations, including things like intonation, stress, rhythm, pitch, timing, volume, gesture, and eye contact. They have to study the features of spoken multimodal texts used to position audiences, such as appeals and repetition and vocabulary choice. And they have to understand how to develop sound arguments. They have to understand logic and reasoning, how to detect bias, and the development of arguments, both to construct and deconstruct what they hear around them. So for learners in the Victorian context, Oracy is both about deconstructing the communication they hear around them, but also constructing articulate arguments of their own. And so the research that I conducted there showed that Oracy was very closely linked to critical literacy. And that fits in very neatly with the citizenship curriculum. So being critically literate citizens helps them become responsible, active, and participatory citizens, both within the national society, but also the global society. And that is true not only for the Victorian Certificate of Education for preparation for higher education, but also the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning, which is usually preparation for further education or employment. That's more of a vocational pathway. So I think the Australians within the state of Victoria are perhaps much further down the pathway of having high status attached to Oracy in the curriculum than we are in England. And we can definitely look to them as a good example.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And I'm only 1 minute over time, which is not bad when it's chairing a virtual event. So thank you everyone for your contributions, and thank you everybody for also sticking to time. I can see my colleague Rachel's on, but I'll give her a moment if she wants to switch her camera off and ask anything. But if not, I'll have to sort of wrap it up right now to say thank you all. This will be available as a video going out. Please do keep, if you haven't submitted evidence, please do send evidence in to the Oracy APPG, and keep in touch. And thank you. The international perspective, I think, has been so illuminating and so much food for thought. So I really appreciate you giving up your time. So thank you and goodbye.